Welcome to Down to Dunk. I'm your host, Andrew Schlecht. We're part of the Athletic Podcast Network. With me today, special guest, we've got Baraheni on the show to talk about the Canadian national team, this game against the Boomers today. We're going to talk about the Thunder as well because this is a Thunder show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Hope all is well, man. I'm like locked into Olympic coverage right now. I'm watching 100-meter women's backstroke right now. It's like there's a lot going on, man. I'm
Love
locked
it.
in.
That's awesome. So there's a game today that it tipped at 6:30 a.m. I guess 7:30 a.m. for you. You're East Coast, right?
Yeah.
So 6:30 a.m. The Canadians versus the Boomers, and it was a great game. Honestly, like it was kind of more than I was even hoping for.
Oh yeah.
With regards to competition, the Boomers looked like they were about to pull something off there until the third quarter, but then the Canadians took over. But let's just talk about just the game itself, what you thought of it, and then we can kind of dig into both Shea and Lou. But what did you think of the game?
Yeah, I agree. It was tense, especially in that first half. It felt like Josh Giddey and Dyson Daniels were just cooking up Canada's defense, getting inside a lot. It felt like just the dribble penetration from Australia was causing a bunch of issues for the Canadian side. I think some of the shot making from Australia might have surprised Canada. Like Josh hit 2 threes in the first half, and everybody was like, "Oh, okay, we're not going under the screens then, I guess." And so that changed the equation. And I think in the second half, to your point, when you mentioned the third quarter, they made an adjustment. Canada made an adjustment. They swapped. They put Dort on Giddey. And then put Dylan Brooks on Dyson Daniels. And so that kind of nullified everything that was happening on the perimeter. It helped them on the inside a little bit more. And then, Canada was able to pull out the win. But I think they had 10 lead changes in that first half, which is just, I mean, it's no France versus Japan, but it's nuts.
It's so true. In so many ways, it's not France versus Japan.
Yeah.
It was fun though, and part of me wondered, like, why didn't Lou just say, like, "Hey, I've got Giddey.
Yeah,
take him from the jump."
Yeah, you're right.
Because he obviously knows his game better than anybody on that team, and like knows how to defend him, and he really did put the clamps on him. What's the Canadians' view of Lou and his game overall? Like there's definitely like obviously great things about his game. Like the defense is unbelievable. He can be a good 3-point shooter, but when Shea went out with those early fouls, then it's just like Dort time, a lot of it. And I just kind of wondered, because we've experienced that in OKC a lot, and he's obviously a very good player and a player that we all want to be there. But when it's like the adventures of Dylan and Lou, it's just not all. It's just it can be kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to your point, I think everybody was sort of holding their breath when Shea got the 2 fouls, and it's just like, okay, what do we do now offensively? And so they looked to Lou, and Lou hit a couple of threes. He kept them in this one. I think RJ had a really, really great game too. Some timely shots from Dylan Brooks. They kind of just kept chipping away, and I think they locked in a little bit more defensively, especially at the point of attack, to the credit of Lou Dort and Dylan Brooks. I think when they can lean on those guys defensively, they force turnovers, they get out in transition. They're such a good transition team. RJ Barrett, probably one of the best transition players in this tournament. And it makes things easier for them when they lock in on that end, and that sort of, defense to offense, the typical kind of thing that everybody talks about. It really applies to the Canadian team. I'll say this about Lou, and it's interesting because I think if you were to ask most Raptors fans, they would say that they're, if not part-time, but full-time Thunder fans. They're like the second home for most Raptors fans. And so they've watched Lou develop, right, and get those reps that he got initially when the Thunder were trying to figure out who they were and what their identity was, and to see him sort of refine his role this past season, become a better 3-point shooter, become a more selective 3-point shooter too. I think it gave them some assurance that, hey, like they'll know when to take the shots that they need to and when not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been a pretty it's been a pretty cool evolution for him. Being a guy that was undrafted, played for the Blue, came up playing in the playoffs for the Thunder in that 1 year in the bubble year, and then has like slowly become like one of the best 3-and-D role players in the NBA. It's been a really cool evolution.
Yeah.
Another guy who's evolved just insanely is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I just wonder, like from your perspective,
Really? Did
a
he?
Raptors fan, as like a Raptors observer and like a Canadian, like what has like been your view of Shai as he's just like shot up like a rocket over the
Yeah.
last few years?
I mean, dumbfounded is maybe the way to say it. Perplexed. I don't think anybody thought that Shea, when he was on the Clippers or when he was getting, I can't remember exactly which national tournament he got selected to be on the bench, and he was sort of just like a bench warmer for the Canadian team. Can't
Mhm.
remember which one it was exactly, but even at that point, it wasn't like, hey, this is going to be the next Canadian superstar and being yeah, face of the league and
Yeah.
yeah, MVP type player. There was no thought of that. But I think probably the year after Chris Paul went to the Suns,
Mhm.
it looked a lot different and it
Yep.
felt a lot different to watch him play. Just the poise and control that he had, the decision making was off the charts, the shot making in like the mid range area, that improved markedly. And then the 3-point shooting just continued to evolve and has evolved, especially last season. So I think it was this weird just coming out party for a lot of people when it comes to Shea. But hey, we're not complaining. Like this is we're very, very fine with Shea becoming, a lot of people have mentioned Steve Nash as like, okay, who's the greatest Canadian basketball player?
Yeah.
And obviously Steve Nash has won 2 MVPs. The Suns are one of my favorite teams ever, that 7 seconds or less Suns team. And so it's hard to compare, but I think he's up there in terms of sheer talent and how good he's been and how dominant he's been, not only for Canada but for OKC too. It seems like when he's in the game, everything is calm, and I'm sure you have that feeling watching and covering the Thunder.
Mhm.
There's just a calm to the way that he approaches the game, the way that he's able to dissect defenses. And I think you just feel more secure when the guy is on the court. And I think that's the true indicator of a superstar. You feel more secure when Jokic is on the court. You feel more secure when Giannis is on the court. I think the same thing applies to SGA.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. And he showed that poise today. I mean,
Yeah.
his shot making was just unbelievable. He's 8 of 10.
Yeah.
And part of like only took 10 shots is he only played 25 minutes in the game, but he's also he's evolving as a passer too, because it wasn't always like his best skill. Like he was always a pretty good passer, and there was even a time that somehow it got brought up in my mentions about how there was a time where it looked like maybe Josh Giddey was going to be the point guard and Shea was going to play more off ball,
Right. Yeah.
and somehow that got brought back to the surface over the summer. But to think like we were there just a couple years ago is
Yeah.
just so strange. And like I can even see when he's playing with Team Canada that he's evolving as a passer. Only 3 assists, but you can just tell that like he's learning how to like gain an advantage for himself and his teammates, and he seems to be doing a much better job of picking and choosing when he does each one of those.
Yeah. I totally agree. People think scoring and playmaking are sometimes mutually exclusive, but they're
Mhm.
not.
No.
Like Shea's unbelievable scoring ability, his gravity that he has, especially in the middle of the floor, right? Because you think of Embiid and the way that he's able to operate in the middle of the floor. You think of Jokic and those high post actions. Like that's the most dangerous area because one, help can be sent from anywhere, but it also gives you so many options to kick it out to the corner or above the break or down low. Like there's so many different ways that you can read the floor from that area, and Shea has mastered that area. Like
Yeah.
that's his playground. And I think that's what makes the playmaking evolve and pop so much, because now that he's seeing that added attention, now that the gravity is there where every single time he drives the ball, there's two collapsing in on him, maybe three at sometimes. He knows what to do. Did you see that shot that he made earlier today where I think you might have seen it, but it bounced off the rim 50 times, I
Yeah,
feel.
one, like, the contest was, like, perfect.
Right. Yeah.
And I think you tweeted it, I think I retweeted it, and yeah, it just, like, it looked like it had no chance, you know?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
yeah, like, you've seen those kinda shots before, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, he's used to it at this
Yeah,
point. Like, and it's very habitual. And like being a tough shot maker is a quality, right?
yeah,
That's something that you have to be really, really skilled at. And so with the way that he creates separation, the way that he's able to maneuver and kind of slinky his way through the paint to kind of create these shots, he has to be a tough shot maker and he excels. So
yep.
I mean, dude, I can't say enough about SGA and how good he's been, not only for Canada this summer, but obviously the MVP caliber seasons he's had for OKC, and just keep building on it. I know we're going to talk about the Thunder eventually, but like, you know how a guy builds momentum towards an MVP season?
Mhm,
It feels like that for Shea. It feels more of an eventuality than it, hopefully happening. But I don't know.
mhm. Yeah, I don't disagree, and I think the way that he plays is changing the game in a much smaller way than a guy like Steph Curry did, but he's showing everybody that, like, listen, slowing down is just as valuable as speeding up.
Yeah.
Like, just because, like, it's funny because we've seen both in Oklahoma City. We've seen Russell Westbrook, who was just a battering ram at the rim, and like there was nothing you were going to do to stop him from getting to the rim. He was just going to go as fast and as powerful as he could.
Right.
But with Shea, it is like, I'm going to slow down at a time that you're not expecting it, and I'm going to freeze you, and then I'm going to turn on the jets. And
Yeah.
like he's showing that, like, that is it's a NBA superpower to be able to slow down whenever you want. And so I just think, like, that to me is something that you're starting to see even more and more. And even some of these younger guys, and some of the younger guys that are coming into the league are like, they talk about Shea. They
Yeah.
talk about how they want to be like him. And a lot of it is this, like, deceleration with, like, the power that he has that
Mhm.
makes him so unique. And it's really just cool to see him evolving, but then, like, the game somewhat evolving around him in small ways, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because who was it? I think it was Trey Murphy. It might not be Trey Murphy, but he was doing the back pedal, like he back
Yes.
pedals going
Yes.
fast. That was him,
That
right?
was yeah, that was Trey Murphy. Yep.
That's 100% true. It just doesn't make sense the way that he moves. It's so, herky jerky was the way that it was first, kind of talked about, but
Yep.
it really is. It's jarring. It feels like, if you've ever played a game in 2K and you're playing online and it lags, right?
Yeah,
And one moment you're here and one moment you're there and it's kind of just lagging all over the place. That's sort of how it feels like to watch Shea play.
totally.
Um, I know he's mentioned before that guys like Kobe and DeMar were guys that he watched a lot growing up, and you sort of see at least the shot making prowess. It's like, I'm gonna get you off your feet. I'm gonna move in 100 different directions. I'm gonna pivot 1,000,001 times to get this shot off. And you see those little elements that he's kind of carried over from those guys. And just the mid range shot making, man, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy. What's going on with Jamal Murray?
Yeah. Oh, I saw you tweet about that, by the way. I forgot to respond to it.
It's like a genuine question. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to, like, be mean. I'm not trying. I'm like, just like, like, we know this guy's really good. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. I don't think he's healthy.
Yeah,
I do not think he is healthy whatsoever. Jordy Fernandez had a quote.
yeah,
I think it was after their game against Greece, saying he's on a minute restriction. He played 19 minutes there. It just doesn't seem like he's ready to go.
mm,
And I know how important it is for him to play. He would play 23 minutes today, so maybe that restriction's slowly going up, but it's really important for him to play. He wanted to play so much. And for what it's worth, I think he was better today than he was against Greece,
sure.
although that's not saying much.
Yeah,
Um, it just doesn't seem like he's all there health wise. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. For what it's worth, I think if there was, if there was a Wiggins or a Zach Edey conversation where they actually wanted to play and were able to play, you might see them not go with Murray and go with one of those guys
yeah.
just because of the health situation. But Yeah, it's tough to watch right now for sure.
Yeah, it is. Because like and it's not like I think this dude's done or something. It's just like no,
Yeah.
we know he's much better than this. Why didn't Zach Edey play?
Summer league for the Grizzlies, apparently, reportedly,
Okay,
and working on his NBA off season is the
okay,
official quote that he had. So
okay. I
yeah,
mean that makes sense to a degree, but it's also like, hey, we're pretty small up here. We need
yeah.
your help.
Well, also, like I'll throw this to you. What
Yeah,
would be better reps for a growing young big man? Playing the Olympics against Joel Embiid and Victor Wembanyama, or against Luka Garza in I don't know.
not
I
summer league is the answer. Like that's the answer.
Yeah, I don't see. I guess maybe there's just a thought process to his regiment in the summer and work
Yeah,
getting him to whatever. But
yeah,
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 reps wise, I think Olympics would have been better.
yeah. I think and Team Canada could use him, and like no more Kim Birch minutes. How about that? How about we just
Yeah,
play Zach Edey instead? That might be nice.
yeah.
Uh, anything else from Team Canada? I mean, RJ Barrett has been really good. I don't love his game. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing basketball game, but he's just effective, and he was super effective today, and has been, and is just. I mean, he's rock solid, and I think he's gonna. I mean, he's definitely one of the huge reasons why Canada's got a chance to medal.
Big time. I'm curious to see how this all translates over to the Raptors, just because obviously I cover that team, and
Yeah.
so I'm curious to see how that looks next year through an 82 game stretch. He played well for them last year in the 32 games that he had with Toronto. Felt like he figured it out. Kind of doing a lot more off of the ball to get opportunities for himself, catch and go type of situations, not necessarily isolating as much. So much more efficient at and around the basket. So I'm curious to see how that looks in the NBA. It looks great in FIBA, but obviously that translation doesn't necessarily happen all the time. FIBA Barrett is here, though. FIBA Barrett is definitely here.
Yeah, he's been awesome. Let's take a quick break, and we come back. We're going to talk about the Thunder,
All right.
and we're back after that quick break. Let's talk about OKC. They made a few moves. They drafted a few guys. They brought in Caruso, which we saw the guy who they traded this morning, and Josh Giddey, who played really well for the most part.
Yeah.
The game. Let's just start with just the Caruso trade overall. What was your reaction to that, and like, what are your thoughts overall on the Giddey for Caruso trade?
Thieves. I tell you. It was really surprising. I mean, I know Josh Giddey was at a low point in his value after the postseason. And I thought that, ultimately, like, he was one of the more highly touted players coming out of that draft class, has had some flashes, has had some moments, has had some really good moments, like very, very good moments. But that being said, very surprising that at that point, the Bulls were not able to conjure up even one single pick, second round pick, first round pick, future protected pick, whatever, just nothing. And that's more about Chicago than it is about OKC. From OKC's perspective, match made in heaven. I really think it's perfect. And so there are a lot of qualities that Alex has that you would have hoped that you could bring from a guy like Josh Giddey. For what it's worth, I think Alex Caruso is a really underrated passer.
Yeah.
And playmaker. I think that's a quality that goes underrated just because people bring up the defense and the tenacity and whatnot. And that's valid and true. I'm sure I've heard it a bunch on podcasts. I'm sure you agree with this, but now the Thunder have one of the best point of attack defenses in the league, guard rotation wise, wing rotation wise, between J-Dub, Shea, Kaysen, Dort, and now Caruso. It's just not many holes defensively. And so that exists, but I think the rebounding and the playmaking is something that's going underrated. And that's where I think, maybe 40 games into the season, we'll start talking about, Alex Caruso is an extremely good rebounder. And so he's crashing the glass. And actually the size, people are talking about the size loss that they had with losing a guy like Giddey. I actually think that might not apply as much because of how good Caruso is at crashing the glass and making plays. So that's where I'm at. I just think it's a home run. I think it puts them, if the Hartenstein deal is a separate part to this, but I think their summer in general has put them as the favorites in the West, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at basically their wings, they're like wing defenders are going to be Caruso and Dort, and like
Yeah,
both are not 6'8". And whenever we think about wing defenders, we think, oh, they've got to be 6'8", long arms, all this stuff.
right.
But if you watch the Bulls at all last year, Caruso was the guy defending all of the big wings.
Yeah,
Lou Dort is the guy who's defending Luka Doncic, who is a giant man. Like those guys can handle the bigger wings, even though they're not, giant wing size themselves. So I think that, some of that's a little bit overblown, even by myself. Whenever they made the trades, I dug in a little bit more to Caruso and it's like, oh, yeah, this dude
right.
can defend bigger wings.
Yeah, even Cason Wallace is like the shorter guy who could
Yeah.
play bigger, right?
Mhm.
Feels like that's a mold that the Thunder like.
Yep.
I mean, I don't mind it as long as positionally they can guard up, and I think both guys have proven that they can. So it until it is a problem, it isn't, right?
Mhm.
And so like from the Thunder perspective, I'm mostly curious what the starting lineup looks like,
Yeah.
how much they experiment with different lineups, because we know Mark Daigneault loves to experiment and loves to throw out different things throughout the season. How much does that impact how they look on a game to game basis, right?
Yep. Yeah, and then they signed Isaiah Hartenstein, which is a great signing. They obviously needed more size. They needed somebody to come in to spell Chet that was a little bit better, and a guy that could play with Chet. And I think that they could play more confidently with Chet
Yeah.
this upcoming season. Just overall thoughts on his fit in OKC.
So surface level, it's a great fit. I think they saw a need that they needed. They immediately got it. But I kind of want to throw this back to you, and I'm curious what your thoughts are when it comes to Hartenstein and how he might affect Chet Holmgren
Mm-hmm.
and the way that he quote unquote develops. I tend to be of the opinion that it won't impact him negatively because of how much Mark Daigneault experiments. So, there will be nights where Hartenstein comes off the bench. He seemed to be comfortable in that role in New York, where sometimes he started, sometimes he came off the bench. Do you feel like that may be an issue moving forward long term when it comes to Chet?
I think that they are going to start to diversify Chet's game this year.
Okay.
I think like he's going to play a lot of center still. I think that ultimately the best lineup is going to be with Chet at center. But he actually defended wings pretty well last year in spots. And I think if he can be a guy that can play the 5 and defend threes, I
Right.
think that just makes him way more dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they're going to give him the opportunity to defend wings at times, and they can play these jumbo lineups that make a little bit more sense than what they would have had last year. And so I think it's more about his development. And also, when they brought in Hartenstein, there was way more talk than I would have thought about his specific development too, and like
True.
what he could be.
Yeah.
And they think of him as still a young player and a guy that has some growth there. And I think that growth is probably going to manifest in the form of like, let's see if this guy can shoot threes.
Right.
Because if he can shoot threes and he can pass and he can rebound, he can protect. I mean, like this is a very valuable player for you. He's already going to be valuable, but I think if you can unlock the shooting, which he's tried before in different spots, and then I think he was at his most success when he wasn't.
Right.
But I wonder if there's a way to unlock him there. I think it'll be a good thing. I think honestly too, Chet doesn't need to play all 82 games. Like he doesn't need to go through that, and just having somebody that you can throw in the lineup, like, yeah, we can play Hartenstein 35 minutes in this game, no problem. I think like that is also a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And so I think he's going to help him quite a bit. I think that he could teach Chet some things as well. Having a veteran that has played in a lot of NBA games, I think will help because, from the big position, they don't necessarily have that kind of mentor either. And it's not like he's there to be a mentor, but he can help, talk
Yeah.
him through some matchups and things like that. So I think it'll end up being a good thing. I think that it makes the Thunder just more versatile overall, which they didn't have a ton of versatility last year. And I think it's just going to give them a little bit more of that.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is just like big to big passing with those two. because I think Chet has shown some chops as a playmaker. I think, obviously Hartenstein has. And so how do you diversify the offense through that? Because I think one issue OKC ran into in the playoffs, it was like, great, J Dub isn't having the best series against Dallas, and they are putting incredible defenders on Shea. How are we going to diversify this offense and get easier looks for other players so that we can eventually get better looks for J Dub and Shea? And so finding good offensive situations to get easy opportunities for Chet might be adding another big man who can pass.
Mm.
And so that adds an element to me that I'm just intrigued about to watch next season. And I think, I'm sure you've brought it up as well, but like the financial flexibility of his contract is a huge bonus, massive in my opinion, because
Yep.
long term, you set yourself up to be able to extend J Dub and extend Chet and, supermax Shea eventually without really having to hurt yourself financially by having a Hartenstein's contract on there.
Yeah, I mean that's been the thing that has been most impressive is that they've been able to improve the roster while also staying flexible. And I mean they're going to be under the tax and could realistically be under the tax again next year.
Yeah.
And to be a contender for 2 years in a row with no tax payment is pretty wild. It actually, I mean, it allows you to do what most teams are going to struggle to do is keep together a very good team under the new CBA, which the CBA is like designed to break these teams up that are really good.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Thunder give themselves a longer runway with all of it.
I have a question that you brought that up now. I'm kind of intrigued. Okay. So this was sort of the case with the Warriors when Steph Curry signed that under market deal,
Yeah,
right? Because of
yeah.
the injuries. And so that provided them the runway eventually to sign Kevin Durant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Oklahoma City should sign Kevin Durant. That's not where I'm going with this. What I'm saying is I think in this new CBA world, they've provided themselves the flexibility to eventually not only contend for one championship, but hopefully, multiple.
Yeah.
And so in this new dynamic with these new rules, I guess I'm asking you, do you think this team has the potential asset wise, pick wise, flexibility wise to do that, much like Golden State did?
Yeah, and I think a lot like Golden State, it's going to be about their three guys they have already.
Mhm.
And in Golden State, it was about Steph, Clay, and Draymond. And
Yeah.
I think in OKC, it's going to be about Shea, J-Dub, and Chet. And it's going to be about how far can those guys take you, because they do have everything they need in order to make a big trade, but you basically cap yourself at like a couple year run if you want to keep all these guys on these deals and you want to
Yeah.
trade some of your smaller deals. And like Markkinen is one that people still want to talk about, and we talked about on our last show that it just doesn't make any sense. You basically are saying, okay, great, we have this great team and you better win a title in the next 2 years because we're not gonna be able to keep this together, so good luck. you
Yeah,
know
exactly. Yeah.
um and so yeah, I think that having the point of attack defense, like you mentioned earlier, is such a huge deal. Having a number one, number two, and a number three score is obviously huge. And then it's like, can we get enough shooting? Which I think they have enough shooting. It's just, can those guys make shots in the playoffs?
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to. Is like, can Isaiah Joe show up in the playoffs? Lou Dort was really good in the playoffs. He's probably their third best player. Great. Can Alex Caruso replicate that? Can he be one of those guys too? Because I think one of the underrated things that happened in the playoffs is that they really only had like four guys that they could count on, when the chips were down. And I think some of that was inexperience and age, and you can only get experience by going and doing it. And so I
Going
think
through
that
it.
that's part of it for them. But I think too, like they're going to have, I mean, role players always change, and you have to
Right.
trade guys out, and you're going to find people that are better fits. We're already seeing that with Giddy for Caruso. We'll see that evolve more and more as the years go on. But as long as they can have their core together and find the best ways to complement them, like, I mean, Golden State found the right guys. Sean Livingston was huge for them. David
Iggy.
West
Yeah.
was great. Yeah, Iguodala was like the guy for that helped them the most. But just finding like these little bit pieces along the way
Yeah.
to help you is something that the Thunder are having to figure out now, while also developing these younger guys. So I believe that there's like something special happening in Oklahoma City, and especially the second time around. And see, honestly, one of the things that signals that to me is that Isaiah Hartenstein was willing to sign on the dotted line, at all.
Yeah.
It just hadn't. I mean, he's their best free agent ever. The Thunder have never spent $30 million annually on somebody in free agency.
That's wild to think of. That's incredible to think of.
Yeah, it's never happened.
Wow.
It is crazy.
It's wild that the number one team in the Western Conference last year markedly improved and gave up no picks, nothing whatsoever. That's incredible, man.
Yeah, that's the power of free agency too. That's how you can make a big jump, is like you don't expend assets, you go get somebody via free agency, and then they made the Caruso swap. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it could take a little bit of time for them to kind of get it going, but I think they're going to be awesome this year. You said you think the Thunder are the best team in the West? Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
You think they're going to? Okay, so if you're going to pick the NBA Finals here on July 30th, 2024, what would you predict?
I mean, I have to double down on this
Okay.
and say OKC. Yeah, I just think, you look at the rest of the West with Denver losing KCP, and Minnesota obviously has done what they haven't really changed much. They added Rob Dillingham, but no more major changes there. Dallas obviously improved. We'll see how Clay looks in that situation. But I think the team that improved the most is OKC, and they were the number one team in the Western Conference last year. So it feels silly to not bet them as the favorites, So yeah, I'm gonna double down. Say OKC.
Okay. Awesome. S, thanks so much for coming on the show. Tell everybody where they can find your work, audio, video, everything. Tell everybody.
Yeah. At Just S Baraheni on Twitter. I write for Forbes, do some stuff for Raptors Republic, cover the CEBL if you're interested in Canadian basketball by any chance. And yeah, you'll see me around. I do some stuff everywhere. But yeah, appreciate you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, S.